Hi everybody and welcome to today's Mediaworks masterclass. We'll start with some introductions. So as people who are regular watchers, listeners will probably recognise, my name's David Norris. I'm Chief Operating Officer here at Mediaworks and I'll be hosting today's Mediaworks masterclass. And today I've got with me Eve.
Yeah, my name's Eve Monaghan and I'm the Digital Analytics Lead here at Mediaworks.
And James.
Hi, I'm James. I'm Paid Media Director.
Fantastic. So today we wanted to talk all things data-driven measurement. So really talking about measuring what matters to improve ROI. I guess from my perspective, we always talk about a free giveaway. So one of the free giveaways that we're going to be offering today is a free tracking and GA4 audit. We'll talk about, I think, why all of this is really important as we go through today's session. But as I say, as always, there should be a link in the chat that's just about to appear or has already appeared. Please do sign up for that. It's a free, no obligation tracking audit. So it's really just an opportunity for us to look at what's going on within your account, what you're doing across GA4 and how you've set up for measurement and tracking the right things. So I think hopefully we'll talk today about why that's a really important element of any sort of digital marketing strategy as we move forward. So I guess the first place to start, I'm going to come to you, Eve, on this one, is sort of fixing measurement foundation. So when we talk about like measurement, I think we often sort of take over accounts that probably don't have some of the basic principles in place, I think it's fair to say. Or when we're asked to audit accounts, we often see a lot of the fundamentals and the foundational aspects can be missing, and that causes a massive amount of issues within accounts.
Yeah, definitely. So as you alluded to there, we're kind of going very back to the basics here. Like we know data is really important for continuous improvement, but if you haven't got the right foundations in place, then the data might not be right. So some of the kind of common errors that we see when we take on new accounts are around event setup. So things not being set up correctly in that central tag management system, not using the right firing triggers. So you're not actually measuring something that you might think you are measuring. Second is sort of like double counted conversions. Sometimes things can get duplicated and then your kind of performance looks overinflated. Number three is sort of consent mode gaps. So obviously we're in a real privacy first world, just making sure we're adherent to legislation and don't have gaps in measurement due to consent reasons. Fourth is around sort of naming standards and conventions. So things around UTM parameters, if things aren't standard, then it makes it a little bit difficult to measure things down the line. If you're using one version of a source or something, and then there's another one with a slightly different spelling, and you're only measuring one, then it kind of might underinflate or underplay. And then lastly, just around the customer journey. So it's not stitched end to end. So we might be measuring things in like Google Analytics, but then not correcting that to sort of the offline journey and how that actually translates to leads or revenue.
Yeah, and I think there's two elements of this for me that are always really important when it comes to data accuracy and measurement. I think one is actually then how are you benchmarking performance, how are you driving performance across a range of these areas, I think is one of those key areas. So again, if you're not measuring things accurately, again, where do you know how you're able to attribute? Because I think we often talk about like correlation versus causality, and we want to obviously be able to see sort of where performance or where specific activity is causing sort of uplifts in performance or challenges in performance. I think it's one element, but also like reporting within the business, I think is always a really important element. I'm thinking we were all meeting with a client, for example, on Wednesday in London, and we were talking about sort of as part of that onboarding process, how important it is to get that data accuracy correct when reporting upwards, but also reporting cross-team, cross-function, etc., whether that's speaking with a sales team and talking about we're driving X amount of leads accurately. I think the worst thing anyone can do in this space is inaccurate data just kills organizations in terms of digital performance. So I think it's so important that you do put sort of those reliable measurement sort of principles in place. So when we talk about sort of reliable measurement, we talk about 4 pillars these days, don't we, Eve?
Yeah, so we'll talk about these 4 pillars. So the first one is control. So like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different events going to lots of different places. It's sort of how do we kind of centralize that and make it really easy to manage. So using a sort of central tag management system, something like Google Tag Manager, means you have all of those pixels and all of those events sort of housed in one place. You don't need to rely on developers and things to implement things on the site. You have a lot more control over it as like a marketing team. The second one is consistency. So these containers in Google Tag Manager can get very messy with sort of different naming conventions, kind of similar to how I alluded to earlier. So just really ensuring you have a clear naming standard across all of your tags and triggers and things.
I think just on that one, sorry, Eve, it's so important, isn't it, that? Because I think, especially in larger organizations where you've got sort of a decentralized model where, for example, you might have certain people building campaigns, or you might have different activity running over here that's run by a totally different department. It's like we see so much inconsistency in this, and it does make reporting an absolute minefield, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And another thing that we see is this sort of real basics bit in the tagging and stuff that often gets passed around between different colleagues, different agencies. So when it kind of gets to us, it's been all around, and it's just kind of all the naming conventions are messed up, and it makes it really hard to kind of understand what's being measured and what's being sent to the different platforms.
Yeah.
So yeah, consistency is very important. And then the third pillar is compliance. So I mentioned earlier around consent mode V2 and how we need to kind of adhere to those legislations, obviously just to respect people's sort of privacy preferences, but also to make sure if they don't consent that we're still modeling the data to get sort of like an accurate picture of what people are doing on the site. And then fourth is around resilience. So just keeping up to date with sort of the best practices in sort of the measurement world. So here I've mentioned server-side tracking, which is kind of a bit of a buzzword and kind of theme that's coming up a lot lately. So it's just really kind of tracking things through your server and not through the browser, again, to just help with compliance and stop inaccurate data through like ad blockers and browser blockers and things.
I think, James, it's fair to say, isn't it? I think in the performance world, I know we both have been at Mediaworks for 5 years. You were here when I obviously started. We've sort of been through this a bit, haven't we? In those bottom 2 areas in particular, around things like consent mode and what that did in terms of things like cookie policies, etc., all coming in, and the impact that then had on data, and sort of coming up with resolutions to, I say, model the data when it's not perfect. And then I think, obviously, we are still talking a lot to clients about things like server-side tagging and tracking and what that actually means.
Yeah. I think the compliance and resilience piece is like, that is just setting you up for an ever-changing marketing landscape. As you say, in the last sort of 10 years, I suppose, in a total level, like data privacy policies have changed, GDPR's changed. We've had iOS 14 changing how cookies are tracked, and all of that data is passed through. All of that has created a much more fragmented environment, and that's meant it's harder for a connected single view, particularly from a platform pixel, to be able to track all the way through. That's why having a server-side tagging route where you've got a parallel route where it's less reliant on things where the users can drop out, and you just have a little bit more clarity and a sort of parallel view to sort of double down on that thing. That just makes your conversion match rate much stronger, and you've just got a much more transparent view, because it's less reliant on points of failures, which there's a lot more of them than there maybe were back in the days, or in the Wild West of data privacy, where literally everything could be tracked and not a lot of policy was around it. So compliance and resilience, and setting yourself up with the right sort of future-proofing tools is really important for performance marketers particularly.
Yeah, and I think it's so important in the digital space, because I feel like digital rode the wave, if you like, of being measurable, being more scientific than, if you like, other forms of marketing that previously went, where it was much more about like visibility and awareness and other metrics which were harder to measure. Some of those softer conversions. I think digital always grew on the fact that, you could attribute effectively. And I think for me, it's why it's so important that we've sort of pivoted, if you like, to incorporate things like consent mode, and how did we overcome that? Because if you start to be unable to measure and unable to track, then digital becomes harder to justify and becomes less measurable by its very nature, which I think is one of the things that, like, we are quite scientific, we're quite like maths orientated. We like seeing performance results and being performance driven. So I think for me, it's so important that you get that baseline right. I guess then this sort of leads into everything that I guess we would start to think about, Eve, from when we talk about that free audit. I guess this is similar to some of the approaches that we would take, in the sense that sort of we would look at what measurements taking place, how we would then think about documenting that, like, again, recommendations for implementation. So do you want to take us through sort of steps to better tracking?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've called this the measurement MOT, and it pretty much is exactly that. So it's kind of just looking at all of those basics that were mentioned and sort of like tracking across the board, like what have you got implemented, sort of hard coded on your website, what's through a tag management system, is everything firing correctly, are your GA4 settings configured correctly, just like looking at all of that and almost like red, amber, green in it, what's in a good shape, what kind of needs a bit of work, and what is just completely not working. And then kind of moving on to step 2, that's where you kind of document that plan, what is having the biggest impact on performance right now, and just work through those and kind of actions in terms of priority. And then 3, just implementing them and just continuously testing and QAing them as you go along.
Yeah, and I think that structured approach is really, really important, because I think that sometimes you can feel, or you're in the platform, you can see that stuff isn't quite working. But I think having that methodology behind the scenes that goes, right, okay, I'm going to approach this in a really structured way, is something that sometimes people can get quite sort of lost in, because there's so much data out there. I remember a client, again, from when we were earlier this week, who was talking about, the challenge often with digital is there's that much data that comes out. It's about understanding what is tracking and what's relevant and what isn't, because there is a load of metrics, in my opinion, in GA4, which are interesting, but probably not too telling and not too impactful in lots of ways. But again, it's about really just understanding sort of how your tracking's working, how you're all set up, and making sure that ultimately you're set up for success. So I guess then when we talk about sort of connecting data for clarity, this is really important, isn't it? Because I think that there's so many data sources now, and how do you all pull that into a centralized view of everything?
Yeah, I think I'd say, like, there are so many different platforms now that are involved in our businesses, our marketing, and each of them is almost isolated in a lot of ways that it tracks the data. Some are very similar data points that they're tracking, but everything's quite fragmented. You've got the likes of your CRM system, and is that connected all the way through? But if all the information on whether that's a good lead and how is it going through a qualification process to actually becoming real value, if that's all trapped in the CRM system and not passing it anywhere else, it becomes very hard for your marketing activity to adapt to it. Equally, like if you're using Shopify, you've got to connect that to your performance activity. That comes with a feed on a shopping front. All of that they're just additional data points. And then there's channels as well, and your website piece. So each of those channels and each of those different platforms that we have to work with is a potential barrier and a potential problem that we need to find a way to work through and to connect in order to give it that true view that allows us to report up into a business and give them metrics and metrics that matter and that actually sort of align to those sort of commercial objectives. That's just the digital space. You've also got offline, like there's, if you're in retail, or if you're in a sector where part of your application or your lead process is offline, be it housing with sort of people going to view a house, or finance where it's loan accepted stages and all of that sort of thing. There's an offline journey that, like, many cases gets missed out. And if we can't see those data points, and if they can't get plugged back in, you get a fragmented view, and you can't accurately attribute whether your meta campaign has actually driven that house sale, because you've just said that we've got a couple of inquiries for a house viewing, and is that actually going to drive that? So it's about connecting those. It's about understanding those barriers and trying to work through solutions that sort of minimize that data loss in that process.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I know we talk about this in slides time, but particularly around things like when you're trying to understand what is driving performance, it's so important to understand sort of, it's one thing being able to report from a digital perspective, we're generating X amount of leads, for argument's sake, your loan accepted example. But it's like, loan application on a website might not then mean like the person undertakes and takes out a loan on the other side. So it's about how you stitch that back, because ultimately, yes, all of that's great that we're generating those leads, but actually what a lot of businesses obviously run on is what does that mean in terms of pounds and pence, and actually tying that back in. So it's so important, isn't it, that pass through of data is there, because a lot of the platforms as well are crying out now for that first party data, aren't there? And again, I know we talk about that in a few slides time, but it's such an important element. And I guess, James, then when it comes to sort of creating a KPI framework, sort of, we've put on screen some of the structures that we take clients through around understanding what their KPIs are and how we move through that. But it's interesting to think about, like, how do you structure those KPIs and how do they all roll up, and what's the hierarchy behind them?
Yeah, I think at its foundation, it's about measuring what matters for the business. And so you have to look at that top line commercial objective. Like, what is the overarching goal that we are trying to achieve through the marketing activity, or the business is trying to achieve for the next year, or whatever it is. And it's breaking down those KPIs and then working out how your channel strategy and it's a channel list on screen there, but that could be broader than channels. That might be campaigns. If you're the sort of business that runs in sort of sectional bursts, you just need to know what each channel or each campaign will have its own unique sort of objectives that feed into that top line objective. And it's about building a hierarchy and a tiered system that all feeds off that top line objective. So if it's a revenue target that we need to achieve, like 20% growth year on year, and we're looking at going into our first channel, it's like, okay, what are the campaigns that are now going to be, are they working towards that target? Is everything aligned? And once we know that and the campaigns are aligned, it's about, like, are we tracking the right KPIs within that to feed that back up? So are we tracking revenue, lifetime value, conversion rate, AOV, all of those things to feed back into that revenue target? But equally, if the business goal is something different, like, have we aligned the metrics to feed into that? And that view really means that it's in a simpler possible way. Like, what good looks like for your marketing activity and your performance activity, and it's all feeding that big goal and that top goal. So it's easy to report inside the business as well.
Yeah, and that sort of leads into this slide, Eve, in terms of then sort of, you've touched on it a bit, James, there, but sort of what is the solution to all of this, where you've got, like, disparate platforms that don't speak to each other? Like, I guess pulling it all into one centralized view is so important.
Yeah, exactly. So once you've got that KPI framework and you know exactly what you're going to be measuring and what's really important to your business, then it really is just about bringing them together. So we've used the example of a dashboard here, but it really can be something a bit less, just even a consistent, like going back to those pillars, consistent reporting framework, even if it's just going into these different systems, pulling those metrics into a deck template every week or every month, and just kind of trying to draw similarities between the metrics and kind of understand what's influenced each other, and then, like, telling a story with it. And then also on the flip side, you could have it in sort of a dashboard that's sort of designed to help you sort of make those decisions. So bringing those key metrics, blending data from the different platforms where you can, and then, sort of just reporting on that frequently.
And I guess into that, then, you mentioned there sort of dashboards, which is a really important element. I think is like, what is the blueprint for an effective dashboard? Because I think everybody would love to get to a point where they've got a dashboard that shows them across various touch points, across multiple channels, like where performance is at and what we're actually seeing from a digital marketing perspective. So do you want to talk people through around sort of how we go about doing that within Mediaworks?
Yes. So firstly, like I mentioned before, a decision first design. So I think sometimes we see dashboards where it's kind of just everything's thrown in and it's like, what's really the purpose of this in the first place? We could get this data from all those systems, but it's not kind of aligned to that KPI framework. So something we do when we build a dashboard for any client is we would do a KPI workshop and would really get to the root of what are those metrics that matter before we even put any sort of design in place. So decision first design is really important. The second one is around focused core KPIs. So I kind of mentioned that prior to the design. Drill down for granularity. So really get into that campaign level, having a date drill down, anywhere where you can just dig a little bit further into the data, like having that functionality within the dashboard so you can get really granular and understand, pinpoint exactly what like kind of data points you need to look at. Blended data, so I mentioned that earlier. So something that we do quite often with clients is client ID tracking. So we could use a unique client ID from GA4 and then also pass that through to the CRM system. And then that kind of allows us to get sort of that end-to-end journey and really understand, like, what are those leads turning into? Is it actually driving commercial outcomes for the organization? And you're able to sort of see that full journey visually through the dashboard when you blend that data. Also, built-in enablement. We often come up with clients who might not be as data savvy and just need a little bit of hand-holding through the reporting. So you can add in sort of tool tips, hover over each graph, or a glossary where it's like, this is what the metric means. If it's up, you can check this. If it's down, you can check this, and just having that built into the dashboard. And then also like daily refresh. So if possible, obviously real time, or daily refresh. So you're getting fresh data every day, and you can be really kind of reactive with those decisions.
And I guess the sort of final point of this section would then be about what impact does that have on decisions? Because it's all well and good having loads of information, but ultimately, I think the last 10 minutes of this session really focus on so what does all that actually mean? Like, what's the point of doing all of this? So I know we've on screen got like 4 examples, Eve, but for me, it's so important, isn't it, that we sort of understand the impact that does have on decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I know James will be able to chime in on sort of faster reallocation of budgets and things, but I think what's really important is just that one narrative. Like, I think that's the key one for me, having everyone singing off the same hymn sheet. You've got like one view and everyone knows what the performance is. We're not looking at all these different places saying, oh, well, I see this and I see that. And then everyone kind of being on the same platform, you can have those earlier anomaly flags. So you're not kind of seeing an issue and then no one else is seeing it. So it's not getting raised. And then kind of a few weeks down the line or something, it's like, oh, maybe we should have caught that. And then, yeah, just being able to be really confident with the decisions going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, isn't it, when we go into this next section, around how we actually turn insight into action. And I think, like, from a performance perspective, it's so important that we take that information and how that actually sort of impacts what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, 100%. We just need to be, ultimately, it's about creating feedback loops and making sure that the information that we're reporting on and collecting through the website, through our CRM system, our tracking and our joined up data sets is providing insight that we can feed back into our campaigns and into our performance activity. It's about making decisions off that data. There's 2 routes that, like, in a performance world, really we can go down. It's either a direct integration, so connecting your CRM system with your ads platform, like a Salesforce or a HubSpot with your Google Ads. And that gives sort of real-time offline or sort of further down the funnel metrics that allow us to sort of make those decisions. Or it's about user input and user understanding and analyzing the data. So it's just making sure that, like, what we're looking at, we can make decisions off. And that's why when Eve was talking earlier about, like, setting out your dashboard in a way that it's a decision first hierarchy to the metrics, it's because we need to be using those metrics to impact our decisions. And that might be through, I think on the next slide, we'll see stuff where we're sort of looking at reallocating budgets in sort of performance and how do we double down on things that are working and be adaptive and sort of flexible with that, or equally pull back if something's not working and change the strategy and go in a different direction. It's about using the sort of like making sure that we're analyzing the targeting. Are we hitting the right audience? Are we focusing on the right area? Are we running a test? Is that like test and learn is a big part of anything, and we've said it in the paid media masterclasses.
Yeah.
We're saying it in everything. Like, data is great, having a measurement framework is great, but your action really is based on your testing, your incremental learning, and that sort of continuous optimization approach. And really, a lot of it is about enhancing that sort of the experience for the user by improving all of the different elements of the ads, from creative to targeting to where we're focusing in. And then in an ideal world with AI and that sort of thing, it's how do we automate things? How do we make it a little bit better? How do we give the right signals to the platforms to let the campaigns work as effectively as possible?
And I guess, like, the statistic on screen now highlights the importance of that, you know, like the performance uplift when we are able to optimize towards an end goal where we are confident with the data is amazing, isn't it, in terms of the impact that can have.
Yeah, I think, like, there's a reason when we take on new performance marketing clients or a new client starting up a new ad account that there's what we call a learning phase.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is to do with we need to get all the data points right. We need the platform algorithms to be in the right place. And we need to settle everything and then get some performance data. And then we can start to kick on with that learning. So the more data you've got and the longer that you sort of use the data in the right way and optimize the process continuously, the more effective your marketing will be. And if your KPI framework was right and you're focused on the metrics that matter to your business, you're going to drive against those commercial goals. And that's ultimately what everyone's trying to achieve.
Yeah, and when I think about sort of what marketing teams should do now, we talk about align and define, which is again what you just talked about there in terms of making sure you've got that KPI framework all set up, etc. Then we're talking about sort of audit and evaluate.
Yeah, so it's just understanding the like where the dependencies are, where are those breakdowns in the data, making sure that we've got a plan around them if we understand them, if we can't solve all the issues, because a lot of this is difficult and it's probably going to get more difficult in the years to come. But it's about making sure that we've got accuracy, we've got an understanding of where we're currently at, and we've taken a view off that. That then leads us into sort of activating and sort of testing. And at that point, it becomes like we know the foundations are set. Now it's about incremental performance gains, and that's setting campaigns, it's budget allocation, it's targeting, it's creative, it's all of the aspects of broader aspects of performance marketing, and testing and improving those, and not just performance marketing, your website, UX, all of the other pieces as well. And then it's about how can you automate some of that, and how do you make it more measurable? That might be automating through a live dashboard, that might be automating feedback loops through connecting platforms, that might be using some of the technologies like AI Max, etc., to sort of drive your performance forward, but always making sure that you're measuring it back against that initial commercial objective.
And I think for me, and we're not going to touch on this too much, James, because there's a lot of information on this slide. But what I'd say is we do talk about sort of that development roadmap, and ultimately, like not everything's equal. So not everybody's sat there starting at a 1, and not everybody's starting at a 2 or 3. Like again, all the organisations with which we work or we begin to work with, we all benchmark them in a particular area or in a particular field. And I think it's so important that we think about sort of how data integration and performance efficiency drives like activity and is important across all of those stages, isn't it?
No, 100%. I think like you as a business have to set, this is the roadmap that we benchmark our clients off and that sort of thing internally. But like ultimately, every business's goal should be to try and improve, because the data integration, and because it leads to better performance and efficiency through that. And wherever you are on the journey, wherever your limitations based on business model or technology or whatever exist, you should always be looking at, okay, what is the next step to advance me on this position? How do I what will elevate my campaigns? What will elevate my reporting? And how do I get there? Because if you don't have a roadmap and a plan, it's very easy to fall into the sort of a position of sort of stagnation where you're not really moving forward, and you can really lose sort of market share and ground in the competitive space that we're sort of operating.
Yeah, and I think data, as we've highlighted, just underpins all of that in this day and age, especially in performance channels, but also just generally across digital marketing, whether even that be organic, whether that be your digital PR activity. Like, for me, it's so important that you're able to think about sort of where data plays a role in all of those elements and where we're able to feed data sources in to show performance. I think it is fascinating. So I guess in sort of summary and wrap up, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and it feels like we've touched on it today, AI, but it's like we love to talk about AI in these masterclasses in 2025. But again, it's so important, isn't it, that the data quality really does underpin fundamentally performance.
Yeah. I think the way the industry is going and with the advent of AI, data is going to become more and more and more important. And it's fundamentally something that we can't really ignore. We have to be looking at all the platforms are pushing for first party data integration. Everything is about everything's going broader and it's becoming more automated. And without the right signals, without the right data inputs, which relies on all of that being reliably tracked and all of those integrity pieces, that is going to underpin the AI performance pieces that are going to lead the way and take on increasing importance in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not on top of your data, you're going to get left behind. You know, I think it's not too extreme to say that. Really, is if you're not on top of your data and the data that you're accessing and the data that you own as an organization in this AI world, it doesn't matter whatever you can do as an output. And there's been various announcements this week about amazing things that you can do. If you're not on top of your data, you're giving it the wrong information, and you know, it's like poor quality input in, poor quality output. It's like it's the most basic equation out there. So I think it's so important, isn't it, that people embrace this data-led world in the AI-driven world that we're about to head into.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think right now is the best time to get your data foundations right, because it will allow you to capitalize on all the exciting developments that are already in the industry in parts, but are definitely coming in the next 6 to sort of 12 months. And I think it is the quality of what you, as you said, like the quality of what you put in is going to drive how well and how effective that activity is for you going forward.
Yeah, and I think the scary thing is, and I don't mean to scare people, but I think the other thing I'd be saying is
it's Halloween.
Well, it is Halloween, we're heading in towards that season, so leave on a fright. But I think it's like, if you're not doing it, the ground you'll be losing against your competitors will be massive as well. You know, I think that's the other thing for me is most people operate in very competitive environments now. And actually AI gives such a promise of competitive advantage, but only if you're playing the same game. And I think if you're not getting your data right, you're not playing the same game, and other people will be, because I think there's such a seismic leap forward that you can make. So hopefully we've sort of piqued people's interest, give them insights today. Again, I just wanted to finish penultimate slide on talking about sort of the free tracking and GA4 audit that we're offering as part of sort of Eve and our data and insights team here at Mediaworks, talking about sort of where people's setups currently at and identifying some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in people's data sets. So again, please do register your interest in the chat. Just type in your information and we'll arrange that over the next week or so. More than happy to share our expertise. And then finally, I wanted to finish by saying sort of thank you very much to James and Eve for their input for today's session, but also that we'll be back on the 7th of November, where I'll be back talking about if you're working in finance and e-commerce, you need to know about the AI first world, and talking all things about agentic and agentic AI. So again, really interesting session coming up. So thank you very much for joining us today for another Mediaworks Masterclass, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.